My name is Brock, and this is the Dungeon Master's Toolkit podcast.
If you're interested in helping out the show, don't forget to like, comment, and share the episodes. Contact me if you or a DM you know would like to be on the show. Use any of the affiliate links in the show notes, or support me over on Patreon or buy me a coffee. And with that, let's jump into the episode.
Welcome, everybody. Today I have Derek, developer of Rad New World. Welcome, Derek.
Hey, thanks for having me on again.
Thanks for being on again. And today, Derek wanted to talk about random tables, so I'm going to let him take it away.
Cool. Yeah, I have noticed that there's, in this wonderful renaissance of tabletop RPGs that we have going on, there are lots of people making all sorts of very interesting tools, and one of the more common ones now is random tables. Random NPCs, random locations, random items, all sorts of good stuff. Problem I've noticed, however, is with a lot of people's clearly early attempts, they're missing out on a few fundamental flavor aspects that would really take their tables from partially interesting to fantastic. And to borrow a phrase that another YouTuber had used, Dale Kingsmill, if you make a description, or if you're using adjectives to describe a thing, you want it to be vague yet evocative. You could say a thing is green, or it's a curved sword, but that's frankly not interesting. That's nothing the player characters will ever remember. It's not something that is even really worth your attention. It's a curved sword's really no different than any other one. If you tell the players that the sword is partially melted, that's something they'll remember. That's interesting. Or if the sword screams the first time it's drawn. So that really should form the basis of your tables. And because it's frequently not, I've found that this is really the great time to start building your own tables. If you want to make encounter tables, or you want random loot, or NPC personalities, you're really going to benefit from a bespoke one. And if nothing else, you don't have boring results. If you roll on a table, and for instance, like the curved sword bit comes up, or shiny or glowing, don't include that on your table. When you're making it yourself, you can really focus down and only use the terms, items, or just results that appeal most to you. And I guess, Brock, you want to start with and build an encounter table or an item? What do you feel?
Let's do items first.
Okay, cool. The best skill that I found to work with that is to steal a card from the Cipher system. And within that game, when you make your character, you describe them as an adjective, noun, that blanks. So in this case, if we want to make a new item, we're going to come up with the adjective, with the list of them, and then what the object actually is, and then describe what it does. And we're going to avoid all of the boring, unevocative options altogether. So if we're describing weapons specifically, or if you want to try to make it more general to do items, let's just say it's a sword. So what sort of sword is it? You can make your tables as large as you want. If you have the time and energy, you can do all the way up to 100 options for D100, or you can stick to just maybe a dozen. The D12 is a nice clean result. And at that point, really just sit down, open up WordPad, or hit paper and pen if you're old-fashioned, and just start writing the strangest adjectives you can come up. Let's say that this option could be melted. We could say it is even something unfinished. It maybe screaming. I mentioned that one earlier. We could also go with focused. Just try to grab as many unrelated, strange ones as possible. Try to avoid anything that would directly pertain to an item itself. You want to go strange. And there are multiple services online. I know Random Lists is great. They have just a random adjectives. Push button, it generates like 12 options. And skim through those and just randomly grab 3 of them. So pulled one up. It has agreeable, extra small, white, bloody, smelly, wicked, selfish, tidy, gifted, faded, sudden, sudden. So I toss that on the list, and if that came up, we have a sudden sword. That doesn't really make any sense off the top of your head, but it can lead you to think, okay, what is sudden? It's quick, it's unexpected. Maybe some aspect of this item, this sword, is especially good for ambushing or surprising. It also, it bloodies too. He's wicked. What might a wicked sword do? Is it evil aligned? Is it just especially damaging, maybe to things that are already wounded? It's a cruel weapon. Stuff like that. Anything that should make you wonder why, or it should summon questions to mind. Those are going to be the best options you put on a table. You want to inspire yourself through the random turns. I'm liking sudden, though. What do you think, Brock? What would a sudden sword do?
Actually, the first thing I thought of with a sudden sword, especially if this is something that the players might find, I almost see this in a scene where the players are in combat or something, and then a player is maybe disarmed for some reason, and then all of a sudden they look up and there's just a sword sitting there. Maybe it wasn't there before and it just appeared in the right place at the right time for that character. Also makes me think of the sword of Gryffindor from the Harry Potter series, where it just shows up when it's needed.
Yeah, great. That would be the entries. We would roll sudden, we have sword, and then if you wanted to go the extra mile, you describe what it does. In this case, this would be the sudden sword that appears just when you need it. And it might be some particularly overpowered or ridiculously magical sword, but it only appears within the player's range or directly in their possession for whenever there's a real dangerous moment. It appears, they get to make their attack, and then maybe it vanishes. Something like that will be an object that your players will remember. Or if it appears in a villain's hands, perhaps it literally just changes hands from the player to the villain, because the villain needs it then. Just a
That'd be a
happy little, yeah,
good back and forth.
yeah, yeah. And that's, I guess that's what I see as the greatest power with utilizing a good bespoke random table. You pick stuff you like already, and you don't have to. How many times have you rolled on a random table and gotten a result that's either just meaningless or boring or just leads nowhere? And if you make your own, you can avoid all of that.
What was that website that you mentioned before?
Randomlists.com. It's a great website. It's not really built for tabletop RPGs specifically, but I've found immense use there. Yeah, there's lots of just random terms, and if you don't have access to the internet or don't feel like using that, just crack open a thesaurus or a dictionary to a random page and just skim your finger down until you see something strange.
I will offer up another one, and that is perchance.org. And this one actually lets you write your own lists in a little, I don't know, it's not quite code, but it's a syntax. And then you can pull from sublists and stuff, and then you can have it roll for you. And they also have things that you can common things that you can import in libraries like noun, verb, adjective, things like that. So you can plug those already big lists in and then let it give you results. So you could actually take what you're doing here, write a little formula for it, and then just hit the run button on it, which is also pretty neat.
Sounds great. I'll have to try. It'll help correlate all of my random piles of junk tables.
Yeah, it's
And
pretty cool. And I think you can share the formulas and stuff that you generate as well, or you can save them and share them and use them.
great. Can you modify them once they've been published, or do they just get locked in?
I think you can. I think it generates its own. If you send it to somebody else, it'll send them basically what's in it. And then if they modify it, I think it saves it for them separately. I'm not entirely sure.
One other aspect I would always recommend to people is unless you are truly 100% satisfied with a table, you can always just make them larger. There's no reason whatsoever to limit yourself to a dozen or six or even 100. If you feel a table grows naturally as you develop new ideas or take old ones out, keep it going. It doesn't have to match a die result. I have a random bar encounter table that I've been working on, kind of just enough time. So it's the one just for the screenshot. It's currently up to, I believe, 72 entries, which does not map nicely to a D100. But if you get a result and you haven't gotten that far, just reroll. Whatever, it's fine. But by the same token, don't ever also demand of yourself that the table has to be a certain size. A table of 6 entries that you really like is infinitely better than a table with 20, and there's only 4 or 5 that you actually care. So trim, edit, make them living documents. That's the word. Keep changing as you need to. And even if it's a completely half-baked idea, build it. It can't hurt anything other than maybe absorb some time, because you never know later where it will actually be valuable. I built a little chart table for a D12 to determine random medicinal plants out in the wild. I was just bored at work and started to throw it together after listening to some cipher system tips on tutorials on how to draw the players into the narrative. And one of the suggestions that I think came from Monty Cook himself was to have the players describe, okay, you find a blank. What does it do? And I've seen people come up with way more interesting ideas and shamelessly stolen them and dropped them into a table. So now I don't need friend Joe to come up with an off-the-wall idea. I already got them written down. It's rolled d12 a couple of times, and it follows the same format. It's you find a root that it's a blue root or a slimy root or a spicy root that does blank, and then I've also added on a column for drawbacks. So it's a spicy root that will help you heal, but at the same time, it also weakens it dulls your dexterity. You lose balance easier. So the penalty to dexterity checks, stuff like that. It's just keep it going. And you'll also find, as with everything in writing, the more tables you build, the easier it gets. You start getting into a flow. You start recognizing better adjectives. You can throw old ones away. If it works, use it. If it doesn't work, get rid of it. But I think it's the only cardinal rule that one should follow with tables like this is if you roll a result and it's even if it doesn't catch you immediately, don't throw it away. Don't just roll again and keep rolling until you get something that really jumps out. If you really can't come up with anything on the first result, then add something else on. Just refresh the page for the random adjectives. We have dispensable, serious, lucky, itchy, legal, cooperative, right, unarmed, makeshift, healthy, magical, sloppy. Nothing here jumps out, so just to grab one, we'll say makeshift, and then roll again, and then we've got even, rough, misty, malicious, productive, wandering, guttural, sassy, wanting, neighborly, interesting, quack. Grab two of the values and just mash them together. I've already forgotten the first term that we grabbed, but all right, so elastic and broken. If you had those two results, try to blend them. If we were, so we're back to the sword. If we had a broken elastic sword, what might that look like? What do you think, Brock?
It makes me think of like a broken rubber band.
Oh, if you've played Soul Calibur, there's a character that has a sword that is capable of breaking into segments linked by a chain, which kind of whips it around. Maybe that's what an elastic broken sword would be. So, and mentioned earlier, also steal shamelessly whenever you need to. If you see someone else's table that you really like, but maybe it's not complete enough for you, take it, utilize it, add to it, keep it going. Of course, if you're going to publish it, then give credit, obviously, but use any resource at the ready. It helps a lot. I carry a little notebook around with me, little maybe 2x4, slip a pen on it. And if I ever encounter a strange adjective, or if I have to look up what a word means, I'll usually write it down, and it almost always finds its way into a table at some point.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. I think there's a Reddit subreddit that is, I think it's D100, and they'll make D100 tables. So that's also a good place if you want to just go and look and see what other people have, and maybe you'll find something new and different. I'm not on there a lot, but every once in a while they show up on my feed.
Yeah, I actually that was what inspired making this in the first place. I saw a few that were really good, very excellently done, and more than a few that needed some more work and polish. Because there was, what was the one person's table? I don't think it was D100, but it was maybe a D12 for to inspire magic. And the options were things like dark, light, lightning, cold. We're too used to those. They're very mundane concepts. If cold magic isn't going to inspire anything new. But if you had, pull out a random, hallowed cold magic, that might inspire something. Perhaps there's a special, so wizards everywhere know this one. If you have a summoning circle, it's made out of chalk. It's it's temporary, you might get blown away, and then, oh no, your demon's loose. But if you know hallowed ice magic, you can coat the circle itself with a nice protective layer of ice. The way it still works, but no one it doesn't get blown away or can't be broken easily. So I always recommend, again, keep harping on the point, find the strange and utilize that as much as possible, because that is where you're going to find creativity much more so than just the normal, the mundane we have.
Yeah, just your regular elements or other everyday things that we're used to.
Yeah, it's boring. I would even recommend, if you do random items for random weapons, get rid of swords and axes, hammers, all that stuff. Throw it away. They've been done to death. Find something new. Maybe the sudden sword is in fact a sudden set of nunchucks, or combine the two. If you want to keep swords, then roll sword and add it. So then you have sudden sword chucks.
That sounds dangerous to wield.
Oh, immensely. And wouldn't that be fun? Yeah, so keep it strange. Just keep and get stranger. Get stranger with every entry. Elicits different senses too. There's the tactile and there's the functional terms, but add sound-based ones. Smell is super underutilized in tabletop RPGs, and it's I think we're all weaker for it because we can all imagine things that look frightening or sound dangerous, but for some reason, I keep seeing that even the best DMs, they shy away from things smelling strange. And they don't have to be disgusting. You can have things that smell sweet or acidic, and it gets stranger. Make of imagine if you're exploring a dungeon full of undead, and you start smelling rose petals. That's going to get some attention, much more so than just, oh, it's musty, it's old rocks. So add rose smelling to your tables for monsters.
Yeah, I like the idea, especially in either set of tables, either with smell or anything else, just leaning into the weird the weirdness, because I think that helps a little bit with, especially in the fantasy genre, or like the rose petal smell with undead, where it's such a sharp contrast to what you would expect things to be like. I think that probably helps with some of the fantasy, keeping the world fantastical and interesting.
And yeah, just thinking about it as well, it's also just a practical aspect. Why wouldn't necromancers use fragrant oils on their zombies or skeletons? Why would you want a shambling corpse to stink up your home? You're already living in an underground dungeon or ancient haunted castle. That's terrible. There's no reason to make it unpleasant. So yeah, send them. Why not?
The other practical reason might be to prevent random animals from attacking your undead horde and picking the scraps off of them.
Oh yeah, you'd have crow swarms just popping through and eating your zombies down to skeletons. Nobody wants that. One other aspect that I see a lot with the smaller tables, and this is the math structural aspect. But if you want to use tables that rely on multiple dice, it seems obvious to some folks, but not to all maybe. There will be combinations that are more likely to. So, for instance, the classic 2 die 6. Your odds of getting a 7, somewhere approaching like 30%, I want to say. But rolling a 12 or a 2 are dramatically low. So if you want to do, say, a random encounter table, and it's not just going to be a one-off thing, let's say we're making a table for not random encounters, but monsters in an area. Your player characters are traveling through, and we want to set up a table so we can quickly generate monster encounters. If you set up the 7 to be it's the most likely result, so set that up to be the most likely monster you could imagine a person encountering in internet, or have the 7 be nothing interesting, just an uneventful day of traveling, and then save the extreme improbabilities like the 2 and the 12 for huge dramatic or dangerous events. On the roll of a 12, in the middle of the character's travels, a dragon flies overhead. Doesn't necessarily have to attack or anything, but just something to suggest a strange, out of the ordinary event. As bonus point, if you don't tell your players that you're rolling randomly, they won't necessarily know and they'll assume it's a big plot point. And if you're really clever, it then becomes its own plot point. Players might take a detour to go see if they can find the dragon's trove, treasures, or they might just want to know where the dragon's going, and that leads off into a whole side quest. So it pays to look up the probability for multiple dice, and the curve does tend to flatten out the more dice you include. If for whatever reason you have a table that you roll 4 die 6, so a 4 to 24, the results near the middle are going to be overwhelmingly more likely than the more extreme ones. So I'm sorry, it doesn't smooth out the curve, it spikes it. So take into account the dice probabilities, and yeah, those ones are a little more difficult to build in a way that is helpful, I would suggest, because if you do have very common results like the 7 on the 2 die 6, if that's a nothing happens, then most of the journey is just going to be uneventful. Why are you even bothering? And if it is a specific event, like encountering goblins, that could happen 2 or 3 times, and your players will get bored of it. So it's the multiple dice tables are better utilized for, say, loot. If you want just common currency to be found, set that as the 7, and maybe a magical piece of equipment or hyper advanced technology, that could be the 12 or the 2. And then just sprinkle more mundane or more valuable items for the less common results beyond.
The other way that you can do multiple dice tables is setting them up in a grid. So instead of rolling 2d6 and adding them together, you can have a grid. So one of your d6 is the row, and then your other d6 is the column. So then you're going but then you have more options then, I guess, because you're going from 11 options to 36 options, but then you won't run into that normalized odds as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. You can also, I doubt it's the correct term, but I've always thought of them as nested tables, particularly for random encounters. I found it's useful. The multiple dice, as you just roll them for different columns, and then have different types of encounters be mapped to each different result, and then try to combine the results. If you have a puzzle situation and you also roll, say, a combat encounter, you wrap them together, and you might have a situation where the player characters have to resolve a non-combat task while there's a fight going. Maybe they have to try to hack through a computer. Part of the party has to hack through a computer system to free the prisoners, and the Imperial stormtroopers are actively kicking open the door and engaged in a firefight with the rest of the party. If you have, say, one option for trade or commerce, and another one that is maybe just a typical, I don't want to say social encounter, let's say a legal problem. You combine that, and you have a situation where the player characters might have to engage with a black market, or they're actively being caught for doing business with a black market. That sort of stuff can help spice up any encounter. And I think that's really the best way to utilize tables. Rather than trying to build things from scratch, you can also just use them to add an element. If you already have an encounter planned out or a monster ready to go, just take a roll on a random table and add whatever element you get onto the creature itself. If your player characters are going to be fighting a vampire, roll randomly on the maybe different sensory inputs and combine that into the encounter itself. Or go back to the sudden sword situation. Have that show up. Well, brain went off in too many different directions at once. Okay, so if you have your encounter planned out and they're fighting 4 zombies or something, we also have the rose oil protection to keep scavengers away from eating the zombies, and the sudden sword. Throw those in together and throw another random aspect in. Again, hit the random adjectives. We got versed, utmost, plastic, lucky, simple, fragile, and these are helpful. So let's stick with plastic. So we have the zombies and the rose scented to avoid scavengers. The sudden sword shows up, and maybe also the floor or the materials of the wall is made out of fantasy plastic. So if someone is attempting to use fire magic or throws a thermal detonator into the corner, instead of just leaving the area charred as normal, you have those areas melt. And now they're sticky, goopy, melted plastic.
And you take damage if you get stuck in them.
Yeah, and the stink is horrible. And of course, that might be a bit overboard, but it's a good direction to think. And you can always parse elements out when you're actually preparing the game. It's better to have more strange to work with rather than less. class.
And sometimes I would say describe part of it and let your players' brains tackle the rest of it, because if you tell them this is exactly what it is and this is the consequence of that, or the walls are made out of plastic or something, right? You could just say the walls are made of this plastic type material and then stop there, don't tell them anything else, and then let them, their gears will start turning and they might either try to figure out why they're like that, or the reason for that, or what they might even tell you what the consequences are. Oh, I wonder if we can melt through this. Or so many times if you just feed them just a little bit, they'll start thinking of potential consequences, or what does that mean. It reminds me of the English teacher. The author said that the drapes in the room were blue because of all of this other deeper meaning, when you maybe didn't really have the deeper meaning in mind. You just put it there and then they ran with it.
That's the good stuff there too, because your players will consistently come up with better stuff than you had planned. How many times have you heard so like, oh, I hope the villain isn't doing XYZ, or speculation on maybe the magic item they're trying to figure out is something dramatically just way more interesting than what you came up with. Run with it. Let it. Oh yeah, absolutely. That was the plan all along. Players feel smart. It's more interesting. It's fun.
And it removes a little bit of mental load from yourself if you let them, if you offload it to the players.
Yep, which is great. And that actually, a brief segue there. The best time to roll on random tables really is during your prep work as well. I've seen some people suggesting that it's good improv practice to do things on the fly and roll random encounter as you go, but that is, I'm sure it's wonderful practice. It's really taxing. That can be mentally exhausting until you have a really, really strong improv background to draw from. When you're doing the prep, getting things ready for the game, that's the time to be rolling on tables.
I would
And
agree with that. I've done a couple sessions where I used random tables very heavily, and I don't have a very strong improv background to begin with. And it started out okay, but it can derail pretty quickly if you just don't have anything planned. Coming up with encounters using random tables is great. Or we've also done it in session zeros, where we're trying to either figure out stuff about the world or about some of the characters. And when you're in, even with it, if it's with other players, when you're in a situation like a session zero, where you're not in the middle of telling a story, right? And you everybody can take time to think about what the random rolls mean and how they might fit together. That or prep, yeah, I would agree, seem to be the best times to use them.
absolutely. And also, if you can, I have not met a lot of players that are really ready to get down with it, but there are tables out there, and you can create some yourself that will help a player make a random character. I have a setup designed to generate random, I don't want to say backstory, but parentage. What situation, how did your character grow up? What inspired them to go adventuring? How was their lifestyle? And can work really well, but a lot of times you just have to get the player, they have to be on board with relinquishing a little bit of control and letting the dice decide. I had a player just recently, and they had their character mechanically, but they just really weren't feeling the backstory element as much. So offered to take them through the random parentage, and the character turned out to have who he thought his parents were not actually his parents. It turns out that the close family uncle that had tutored the character, turns out he was actually the father. And it was just that little element of randomness that the player needed to to give that dramatic flair to the character. And it mechanically didn't change anything. It didn't even change anything about his adventuring motivation, but just finding out that there was like a family secret that his character himself did not yet know, that was enough to help shape the character's motivations and where they went from. It was very interesting.
One of the session zeros that we did a little while back, we rolled everything randomly, including stats, but we were able to pick what classes and stuff we wanted. But then the main randomness that we pulled in was we rolled a couple of random connections with other party members. My character and this other character were in a cult together, and this other character and somebody else were in a soldier platoon or something in a war. And it was a neat way to force the backstories together in weird ways, and certain characters, not that they necessarily have secrets, but they have different relationships with each other based on what their connections were coming into the party.
Traveler, if you have a chance, has a very randomized combat system that does the same thing. At various stages through your character's pre-generation, I suppose, you have to tie their story in with other characters present, either going to school with them or, maybe you serve together in the military. There's also options for if your character conned another character out of some amount of money, or even they attempted to kill each other at some point. Again, all good things to steal. Use these for your own tables.
Did you say that was Traveler?
Yes. Yeah. I think they're up to, is it 5th edition maybe? I could be completely honest. But yeah, every edition Traveler has had, I think they're called them life paths, where you have to roll randomly, and you actually roll skill checks to see if your character has succeeded at certain life challenges or if they failed and suffered consequences. And they've all had them, though they have gotten safer as each edition went on. In very early Traveler, it was actually possible to be killed in your backstory, and you would have to start your character all over again. And as interesting as that can be sometimes, it is not great design for a game.
Spent a bunch of time making a character and then they died.
Yeah,
Start over.
Died in session 0. Wonderful. But yeah, it's random tables are a great addition there. And the one other point that I see a lot with random encounters, specifically for like, you find a monster and what is it doing? When you're going through someone else's table, mining for ideas, or if you're building your own, whatever the situation is, if the monster isn't doing something interesting, it has to at least be useful to the players. If you are running a Star Wars game and the player characters are sneaking through a base and they encounter a room with, it's the bunk room for the Imperial stormtroopers. If all of the troopers are sleeping or eating, that's not worth anything if the players can't utilize it. It's not dramatic. It doesn't inspire questions. Nobody's going to sit there and be really curious about what stormtroopers eat. They want to know, okay, can we sneak past them now? Are they distracted? Is this an opportunity to maybe swipe an ID card or something? So make sure the results are dramatic and engage with the characters, or give them an advantage. I can't tell you how many tables I've seen with results that just do nothing and go nowhere. It's a wash. You might as well have just said, like, the monster's sitting there waiting for the player characters at that point. And again, go strange. Because if you notice that one of the stormtroopers while everyone else is eating, if one of them is licking the wall, your players want to know why. They're now invested and they want to know why TK1703, what's wrong with that guy? And they might even risk going in and disguising or just monitoring that particular trooper. Is he drunk? Is he high? Can we utilize this? Can we trick him? Does he know something? Are the walls, maybe the paint the Empire uses is secretly delicious? Even if it's something simple and non-valuable as that, it's interesting. The players will remember that random guy who was licking the wall.
And the first thing that I thought of is that the players were accidentally exposed to some sort of a hallucinogen.
Yes. Yeah, that'd be
Seeing
great.
really weird things all over.
Yep. The walls are melting. You're not sure why.
There's the plastic walls again.
Yes. See, it ties together. It rhymes. But yeah, that's really all I got on tables themselves. The actual building of them, they're just lists. Assign numeric values. It's easy to do with Excel. But yeah, build them. I encourage everyone to make their own, even if they're not functional. You never know when you might need them. Just start with a list of just random adjectives. That will, and again, stranger the better, that sort of list will be useful for almost any other sort of list. As long as the DM's primary job ultimately boils down to describing stuff in an interesting way, having an expanded list of weird adjectives it will always help you. It will never be useless.
So with that, would you like to roll some dice and come up with a random encounter with me?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Do you have dice available?
I will in 1 second. Literally had them not even an hour to put them. So, Websites it is.
Thank goodness for technology.
Really? And what, we need D12, D20, D6s, whatever.
D12s, I think, for all of these.
Okay, cool.
And we'll test how good the random tables I have here are.
Wonderful.
So do you want to give me 3 D12 to start off with?
Sure. We got 3, 8, and 2.
So 3 was evidence, 8 is remains or debris, and what was the last one?
2.
2 bones.
See,
So
that feels too easy. So we have remains, evidence, and bones. Okay, so we're trying to generate evidence towards a crime, maybe.
there's
So
there's one more table I think we can roll on here quick. There's like a twist table. I just have to find it quick.
okay, not disparaging the table, mind you, but those do all tie together really, really very easily.
Feature oddity, that's what I'm looking for. Okay, give me one more D12.
2 again.
2?
2. Yes.
Geometric.
See, now we're getting somewhere. So, and we're building an encounter from this?
Yes.
Okay. The player characters are investigating a murder. They have come across the grisly scene, and the body of the individual, it's hard to tell even who they might have been. Species can even be a little hard to tell. But the interesting calling card of the murder is the bones have been, flesh and remains have been cut away, and intricate geometric patterns have been carved onto the bones. Some of them, there's some that are speculating that maybe there's some arcane significance to the shapes, maybe the shapes leading to a glyph of some sort. And one of the players, whoever, it may be the priest, might realize that the individual patterns on the bones form a magic incantation. And if you utilize the bone itself, you can use it as a scroll. And in doing so, maybe also there's a high probability that doing so, maybe there's a high chance of misfire and skeleton itself gets up. Oh, you know what? Scratch all that. The bones could be utilized as a scroll, but first the player characters have to defeat the skeleton that is now standing up, and random spells are firing off of its form.
Give me one more D12.
Okay, 3.
So for magic type, 3 is enchantment, which I guess kind of fits.
Yeah. Question is it mind altering enchantment or magical enhancements?
Oh, that's true. I tend to think of, I guess in D&D, enchantment is more like mind altering, right? And I think of D&D in like Skyrim terms of like imbuing something with magic.
And I think at that point, you can say both. Maybe the geometric patterns, if copied from the bone onto an item, will impart it with an enchantment. Or the lights run along the patterns carved into the bones, and any player character that looks a little too closely has to roll a will save or be hypnotized or stunned by a color spray.
Actually, if you were performing a crime, that's not a bad thing to put on there. So whoever goes investigating it could have their mind wiped or be confused or misled or something.
That would make it tricky to investigate. Yeah.
Cool. I like it. That was a fun little lightning round there for an encounter.
I always enjoy these sort of things, and it's good improv practice.
Absolutely, especially when we do it live and I don't have the chance to just sit here for 20 minutes and think about it.
Yep.
Cool. Well, anything else that you would like to say on this episode, or maybe go ahead and plug yourself and your game that you're working on?
Sure. Do the brief plug. I am developing a post-apocalyptic RPG. It's set in the same sort of style as Gamma World, and it's unfinished. But as soon as I have things ready, I'm going to be getting stuff ready for another playtest. So I will be looking for volunteers here before too long. To put it in the right frame, it is Mad Max with X-Men powers. That's the elevator pitch. If you want to know more, I can be found on the hell site that is Tumblr, radnewworld.tumblr. Other than that, I avoid social media. So that's the only place to find me right now.
Awesome. Well, when you are ready for a playtest, feel free to throw that on the Discord server, and I will volunteer, time permitting, to join because I've heard you talk about it more in depth. I would like to give it a shot. So
cool. Yeah, we'll definitely get that lined up. All right. And yeah, thanks so much for the time. I'm always happy to ramble on here.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Dungeon Master's Toolkit podcast. You can find links to all of the products and resources that we talked about on the show in the show notes. And if you'd like to join the community or find out how to be on the show, check out our subreddit or join us in our Discord server.